we're really happy to have these panelists join us today. And we're really going to be focusing on how to transition into UX, or maybe how to transition within your organization to another role that might have some UX principles and practices within your organization. Okay, so before we get started, I'm going to introduce myself, and then I'm going to give the panelists a chance to introduce themselves. So without further ado, you all know you are here at this talk. This is Destination UX, navigating your career towards UX design and research. So our panelists today are going to be Xiao, Vivien Rico, and Janmy Saludo. Okay, so first, some intros. Oops, too fast. Oh, real quick. Is it working? All right, cool. So just real quick about myself. My name is Kieu Tran, and I'm a senior UX designer here at Pros. And I wanted to just touch on some of my training and have the panelists introduce themselves with their training, so that you can see how you relate to a very non-linear path from maybe outside of UX and transition into UX. So my background is architecture and art history, and you can find me on LinkedIn right there. That's my info right there. Okay, so not too much about myself. Now I'm going to go hand it over to the stars of our talk today, and if this will work. There we go. Okay, so real quick, just if you can just tell us, what it is, your role and your background real quick, and also just we'll do that first, and then once we'll circle back, and if each of you can kind of tell the audience about your story in a few, within a couple minutes, how did you get to UX from where you were? So we're going to start off with Jane.
Okay, thank you, Kieu, and hello, everybody. My name is Xiao, and I am a senior product designer at AIG Retirement Services. We are a customer-facing organization. So if you notice, we are a Fortune 500 company around the globe, and the Houston office is focused on the retirement service side. So I work on B2C products, so business directly to customer service. And my background is actually in social science and a minor in architecture. So similar to Kieu, like that psychology, that behavioral science background with the artisticness of considering a holistic experience that comes from architecture. I'm also the co-chair for the mentorship program at Hexagon. You guys might have seen us in the booth outside. Kara's in the co-chair for events in the back. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Jane. All right. Sorry, I have to raise my hand because it's over there. And then I'm not tall enough. There we go. All right, next we have Vivien.
Hey guys, my name is Vivien Rico. I am a principal UX designer at Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, and I'm actually based out of Austin, Texas. A little bit about the work that I do. I work on the OCI Data and AI Services team, where we work a lot on the tools and services for more of the technical audience. So that would be like engineers and data scientists.
Mm-hmm. Can you go into just a little bit of what was your background?
Oh yeah, definitely. So I have a little bit of an interesting background. I actually never went to design school. I didn't go to SCAD, there's no RISD, no Parsons or anything like that for me. I actually studied bioinformatics and computational biology, and I got my master's in information systems. So through a few twists and turns through my career, I went from, going towards the path of a research scientist to a web developer, and going through a brief stint doing product, and then through a few more twists and turns in my path, I became a designer, and here I am today.
Thanks. Yeah, we're going to circle back to her complete story in a little bit, but I also want to be able to give Janmy her chance to kind of introduce herself. Okay, well, yeah, I think I have, for every slide that I'm going to transition.
I'm waiting for the slide queue.
Stand up there. Oh, yeah, there you go. Or, yeah, thanks, Eunice.
My name is Janmy Saludo. I'm currently a UX designer and developer at a construction software company called HCSS out in Sugar Land. Our company caters to the heavy civil construction industry. And my role there is basically, essentially I'm a UX generalist. I do UI, UX design, as well as UX research. I also do the iOS front-end development and conduct a lot of usability testing within the organization. Yeah, so that's currently my role there. My background is actually, I have a Bachelor's of Arts in English with a concentration in technical writing. I also have a Master's of Science in Professional Writing and Technical Communication.
Thanks so much, ladies. That was really great. So you guys kind of got a little bit of an idea of who we are. And before we get really into their story and the fireside chat, I kind of want everybody to kind of get to know each other. And I'm going to do a little quick poll so we know who's in the audience, and then really so that we can frame the context of the conversation. Where are you all coming from? Where are you in your journey into UX? So if you can actually go back a couple slides. A few more. Yeah, here. So if you can just pull out your phones. Hopefully everybody's battery's still working at the end of the day. Yeah, so you just log in here, meet.ps.snux, and we're going to go ahead and take a quick poll. And I'm going to have Eunice pull that up, or actually I'll go over there and just pull it up there. Cool. So is anyone logging in? Okay, yeah. Okay, so the first poll question I want to ask everybody, does everybody have it pulled up on their phones? All right, awesome. All right, so the first question I want to ask is, what is your professional background? Okay, so I mean, we could go on forever, but I think this is pretty good. You know, it's a lot of varied backgrounds. Linguistics, I see. You know, definitely a lot of consultants, things. Yeah, architecture, graphics with a lot of S's, procurement. So as you can see, yeah, I mean, everybody in this room. I mean, a lot of you are from, have maybe a UX. Training background, but a lot of people are not actually in UX. And so it's interesting, right, to see maybe your peers are in here, and this is a safe space for us to all kind of explore and figure out how to move forward in our career. All right, so the next question I want to ask is this. Where are you in your UX career journey? Are you just ready for launch, right? Just trying to figure it out, trying to find out some information about what is UX, and deciding, do I actually want to do UX? Are you in orbit and exploring, right? So you're already in the industry, but maybe you want to transition to a different role, and how do you do that? Or are you accomplishing missions and taking names, right? So are you already in the industry, but you're just here to develop your skills and maybe learn some from our experts here, or network, and or are you rebooting, right? Basically reinventing your career. You're not even in the industry. Perhaps you don't even have a design background. You maybe don't know much about tech. Maybe you're a writer, or maybe you are a social scientist, or who knows what. But yeah, so let's take a look. Our audience, yeah, so. Yeah, a lot of you guys are starting out your career, just trying to figure it out. It's really interesting, yeah, and I guess the second biggest group is rebooting, reinventing your career. All right, that's pretty awesome. Well, thank you guys for your response. That really helps us frame the the entire conversation. So with that, I'm going to go ahead. If you guys can run the PowerPoint slide again, we're going to, as they're setting up, let's hear our panelists' stories and then get into the fireside chat. So I want to start with you, Vivien.
Okay.
Just, within in a couple of minutes time frame, just tell us your entire story of where you came from. Yeah.
Twists and turns there, but
Great.
I gave a little bit about that earlier. So where do I start? Like a little bit about me, right? When I was younger, as all parents are going to ask you when you're younger, what do you want to be when you grow up, right? I didn't know what a designer was at the time, of course. So, I'm a kid in elementary school. What do I know about design? So I said I wanted to be an artist, right? So I have Asian parents. So what does that mean? That means they said no, right? That means that they told me straight up, you need to find something that's going to make you money, that's going to be meaningful, and that's going to be useful for the world, right? Fast forward a million years later, guess what, Mom and Dad? I'm a designer. Essentially the same thing, especially in their eyes. So like I mentioned earlier, I'm a designer with a non-design background. I have, my undergraduate degree is in bioinformatics and computational biology. I got my master's in information systems. And I did all of these things thinking that I was going to be a research scientist. And like I mentioned before, I was able to navigate my way to becoming a web developer and then doing more product. And then now I'm in design. And one of the interesting things for me is that it took me a while to figure out, what it is that what type of design my heart is into. Some folks have this awesome background in graphic design. They are really great at, branding. They can do logos and things like that. They make these awesome consumer products that are, viral and people love to use. I dabbled in a little bit of all of that, but I found that I'm really shining in more of the design for a technical audience. And that's why I'm at Oracle today. I like helping people that are sort of, I guess you could say they're behind the scenes. I like to call them unsung heroes. And that's why I design for, the engineers. That's why I design tools and services for data scientists as well. So that's a little bit about my background. And I think one of the things that helped me transition from, that road to scientific research to design and, taking all those hops along the way is the fact that I was always in this place where I was a bridge, right? A bridge between engineering and design, a bridge between, engineering and marketing and the business. Essentially that bridge between the technical and the non-technical folks. So there is like a place for people like us, the ones that don't have that traditional design background. And I think one of those places is being that connector between, somebody that doesn't have the, design background and somebody that's a little more technical. We can all play to our strengths and then we find our place. And that's what I did.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your story. All right, next, we'll go down the row here. Jane, if you can just, within a couple minutes, tell us how did you make your journey through, architecture and social science and now as a designer for AIGA.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, AIG.
AIG.
Right.
It's easy
A lot
to
of
confuse.
acronyms,
That's okay.
right.
So like you mentioned, and I mentioned earlier, my background is in social sciences, and my passion originated in architecture, and specifically interior design architecture, because I found out when I was going through college trying to understand what I wanted to do, also Asian parents, and trying to prove that I can actually do something design related without it having been the specific design route where you're not making a lot of money and you're just selling your paintings. So architecture was my route. And I loved it because of the way that the design of space can touch a person's life and can change how their experience is with a physical space. You can influence how they feel from day to day, when they're home, when they're working, the color you use, the way you set up the environment. So that was what I was passionate about. Fast forward, I've graduated with my minors in architecture and my major in social science. I'm trying to consider, should I go back to grad school to get my degrees in architecture? And of course, you're back into reality. You're no longer a student. You realize there are student loans that you have to pay off. And of course, you also have to consider making a living. So what's my next alternative where I'm still doing something I'm passionate about? I can do something that's creative and challenging, but then at the same time, I can make money off of. Real talk. So a friend of mine actually introduced me to UX. And by taking a course online, I realized I'm doing the exact same thing with UX that architecture was doing, except you're doing it with a physical, digital space instead of a physical one. So moving into this direction was the perfect move for me. I was interested in technology. It was creative. And I like serving people as my end goal, as my value. So I got to do all of that. It's really cool. So I started doing things like service design with the agency, doing freelance work as a UX designer. And now I'm at AIG as a senior product designer, where really my role involves learning about the user, learning about their personas, producing products that's B2C. So you're actually seeing how my product gets to influence their day-to-day, and you're hearing feedbacks right away to help me iterate in terms of my products. So it's been a really great journey, I think really rewarding so far.
Awesome.
I'm looking forward to the rest of it.
Okay. And next, Janmy. Yeah, just real quick, for the sake of time, just in a couple minutes, tell us your story.
Can you let me know when I'm rambling?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Okay.
So my background is essentially in writing, and I'm a very proud grammarian. And I started off at HCSS about over 13 years ago as a technical writer. And going in as a writer, you're basically doing the documentation for our software, for our end users. And I innately knew that there was something off about our products. If I have to explain a simple task in 20 steps just to complete one simple thing, there's something wrong. And so that's when I started pushing back on having us re-examine our development process, that I knew the software should not be this hard for our end users who are in the construction industry and are out in the field in the sun doing complex work, and they should not have to spend so much time trying to figure out software. And I knew we were missing some kind of design process. And that's, and fast forward, I ended up being part of a team who helped create a design process for all of our products. We started off with 3 products, and we've grown to about 17 products on the market. And we have this design process in place because as a writer, I knew that I'm targeting towards an end user. My goal is to make the software easy to use. How do we do that? And I never really called our design process by its proper name till about 7 years ago when I realized, this has a name. It's called user experience design. And it was just a journey as I knew learning more about our end users and trying to simplify the product, and that the whole time as I'm going through this process as a writer, being able to communicate to them through the interfaces of our software and telling a story in a different way with less written words.
Thanks so much, ladies. So, your stories are very varied, and I think a lot of us can identify with that, right? A lot of you are fresh out of school, or maybe trying to reinvent yourself based on the poll that we have there. And I think in that process, there's a lot of self-doubt, right? Maybe I'm not in the industry yet. How do I make my way to the career that I want? What is the career that I want, right? Maybe I trained in architecture or linguistics, and then you find that, that's not really where your passion is. And now we can all identify with being trained in one thing, but how do I break out of that? There's a lot of fear. We met last night, we talked a little bit about it, and there's, a lot of imposter syndrome going on also. Are people going to believe in my capabilities? I have to prove myself. So I guess, for a lot of our audience, that's probably top of mind. How do you break into this industry? So I want for each of us to kind of talk about what obstacles did you encounter when you first pursued UX, especially maybe in your first couple of roles. I guess I'll start with Vivien. Okay, yeah, and just a couple sentences. What obstacles did you encounter?
I would have to say one of my biggest obstacles was myself. So what I'm referring to is that, so there's a point in my life where I was working at a startup. I didn't have like an official designer title. I didn't have an official engineering title. I was sort of like a hybrid. You could say like I did a lot of the front end development work and things like that. As with all startups, or not all startups, but a lot of them, they start to run out of money, right? So at that point, I needed to find a job, right? Our founders are like, hey, we're running out of money. We want to tell you ahead of time, so you need to find something. So I was like, what am I going to do, right? I am a scientist. Right? I don't have official training as a web developer, really. I'm self-taught. I've been working a lot with the design team and doing product development, things like that, but I don't have that title. I don't have that experience. What am I going to do? When, desperate times come for desperate measures, right? One of the things I did was I was listening to a lot of podcasts at the time, and I heard all these stories about CEOs, and I actually cold called a lot of them, cold emailed, reached out to them, and I'm talking like places like Pinterest and Polyvore and Skillshare and places like that, and they actually responded back to me. They said, hey, we want to talk to you. Let's go have lunch. Let's do an interview, things like that. But you'd have to come up to San Francisco, for example. But I was too scared. Right? I had those opportunities. I mean, I was on the phone with them, things like that, but I was too scared to move forward. So I was my biggest blocker. I didn't believe in myself enough. And if I could, go back and change that, I would have. But I actually do like where I am now. And I think that all those avenues that I took and all those experiences I had shaped who I am as a designer today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we can all kind of empathize with just the imposter syndrome, like I mentioned earlier, and then trying to just find your way to what it is that, connecting the dots with your previous skills or what your interests are, and then also trying to figure out what is UX, where's my place in UX. I think a lot of people may just think of UX as UX design, but really there's a lot of disciplines within the entire industry, right? You can specialize doing UX research, you can specialize in maybe being a UI engineer with UX mindset or being a designer. So there's really a lot that you can actually do, but I think it's just trying to figure that out. So I guess let's segue into the next thing that I really want to ask is, kind of talking about, well, Vivien talked a lot about, her previous experience and how it all culminated into just stepping out of her shell, right? She was really desperate at the time, trying to figure out what she wanted to do, and she basically cold called people, even though as an introvert, you told me you're an introvert, you really just had to just break out of that shell.
Yeah, you just have to push yourself out there. That's one of the things that I would like to give you all as a piece of advice is if I could talk to my old self, I'd say just go for it. I mean, yeah, you're cold calling people, but take it a step further. Obviously, they're interested in you, so there is something there. Believe in yourself. You can do it.
Definitely.
Yeah.
We'll circle back to basically kind of resources and maybe some advice or steps to move into UX. But prior to that, I want to ask Jane. Jane, what kind of skills and experiences did you have in your previous role that you didn't realize that you could bring into your new role? And I know that in your previous life you were an architect or you studied architecture, so there's a lot of similarities, right? You talk about like design sensibility, wayfinding, and in this case, not the digital space that we're all used to or what we think of with UX, but it's more of the physical space. But I guess if you could pull from sociology, which is less of a direct connection, can you share with the audience how you transitioned those previous skills?
Liberal arts is a good study. I know it's not very useful when you come out and you want to find a job directly related to that, but it's a setting point for how you think about life. I think the most I got of social science and the more that I'm in the UX field is the importance of seeing what's not being said and what's not directly visible to you, especially when you're studying a user or you're understanding their pain points. They won't tell you what they need directly. You have to figure that out. I think as a social science major, it helped me think beyond that and make connections when I'm observing users or I'm designing for them. So I think that was part of what I carried over from social science. I will also say my very first role was with a service design organization. And with service design, it's less about the digital platform as much as the experience as a whole, the journey of the users. That concept really is something that I'm carrying into my daily work now as well. I did a lot of facilitation, design thinking workshop, facilitation creation. Those I'm carrying over too to my current role as well. So those things I may not have seen in the moment. I agree with Vivien so much about this. I wouldn't change my experience because all experience is unique and those things are all possible to carry into your role if you pay attention to it.
Yeah, I think UX really affords people of all walks of life to be able to find their own niche, right? Because you can pull from a lot of different disciplines. I think that because the crux of UX is empathy, right? So whether you're designing a technical product or a commercial product, you can always put yourself in the user's shoe and be able to pull from your experiences to maybe help inform your design. So I think that's the good thing about UX is that you can break into it really from any industry. Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I want to go ahead and ask Janmy, what steps did you take to move into UX? You came from a very non-linear UX background as a writer. If you can just give the audience a little bit of advice, so just, what steps did you do into moving into UX that maybe they could learn from?
So, in my role, basically trying to jump into the UX role within my company was, for starters, getting the buy-in to start a UX process in the first place. That took a lot of self-study because at the time, 13 years ago, there wasn't a whole lot, UX wasn't as popular or well-known as it is today. So I didn't have Hexagon UX and HubSpec at the time. But there was UXPA that I looked into and researched it more. And I found out there's quite a bit of overlap in technical communication with UX. So leaning on a lot of the skill sets that I already had in audience analysis, catering my content to the end user, and just repackaging that into a process that occurred in the beginning of software development versus waiting until the end when the work is already done and rework was not an option. It was essentially gathering the data myself and being fueled by passion for being able to create high quality software that was intuitive to meet our end users' needs, and gathering allies within my product teams to understand the significance of how this could impact our products and our customers' business problems. And it was a slow, long journey, and eventually the buy-in was coming through to the management level, and and 13 years later we've come a long way, and its impact has been very evident. So that's how I got into it, because I knew that there was a way to create a more intuitive software solution.
Yeah, I just want to touch on that, is that for a lot of you, I think that unless you're already in the industry, if you are, you may be experiencing that. I think a lot about UX is kind of what Janmy touched upon, right? Is that 7 years ago, when she first started out on this, UX wasn't a thing. And now it's becoming an industry, but we still have to evangelize, and legitimize our actual roles, because there's a lot of, I guess, incredulity. I mean, just like people just don't necessarily respect UX. They just think that we just make pretty things. And I think part of what you don't realize in undergrad is that once you get out into the real world, there's a lot of self-evangelizing that you have to do, right, to promote the industry or your role, especially if you go into an organization that is what we call not that mature in its UX thinking. And so I think that's something that you all may face, and part of that is yeah, having to be able to prove yourself by showing some ROI or referencing other materials or just other companies that have implemented UX and then did provide value in that. Mm-hmm.
Kind of want to touch on that as
Right.
part of what Vivien also mentioned, just the ability to push yourself out there, whether it's evangelizing UX in your organization or pushing yourself into the field. You really have to be very forward in terms of the action that you take.
Mm-hmm.
It's not sitting back and then having the system already worked out for you. Sometimes you really just have to say, this is the chance I want to take. I'm going to do it first and then apologize later.
So what is if you guys can give us just kind of an actual example of how you would go about that?
That is in.
Mm-hmm. In terms of putting yourself forward and maybe evangelizing on your own behalf. That, maybe others who are less experienced in terms of the bureaucracy of a corporation or whatever, how would you do that?
Sometimes you just have to do it on the side. So if you're already in the UX field and your company is asking you to just create pretty products, which happens a lot, but you want to improve the user experience, sometimes you don't get that time planned out for you. You just have to do it on the side and then prove to them that there's actual user feedback that supports your hypothesis or a direction change for your product. And that's not something that you'll get first before you can do it. You just have to do it first.
I think that really touches upon just if you're starting out and, how do you build almost a portfolio, right? It's the same mindset, right? You kind of take a product or a feature and you run with it on the side. It's kind of what we would call like a skunk works project, right? So you kind of maybe do some guerrilla testing at Starbucks or whatever, and it could be a product within your own company, and turn that into a project or a case study that you could use for your own portfolio, but also maybe in this case to help evangelize and say, hey, this is the user research that we did with this target audience, and this is how we discovered that you can, maybe build this product a little bit more efficient in these ways. So I think that's one way, right? That's kind of free in terms of cost, but definitely not in terms of time. But it definitely does help evangelize the value of UX. Thanks. Awesome. Do either of you have some feedback?
One thing, this isn't like, doing it yourself, but I think you need allies. You need a hype man, like on the groups or teams that you're working on. So for example, I love our engineers, but sometimes they will say things like, oh, Vivien's team will just make it pretty, right? And I have one of these designers on our team that does sort of like a design QA, if you will, to make sure that, what we put out in production is, what we mocked up, for example, right? And then they're like, oh yeah, she'll just, check the fonts and stuff. I have to be the hype man for her, right? I have to be like, oh, it's not just fonts, She is actually one of the gatekeepers for our UX review boards that you have to pass as an engineering team. So just to, give her a little more respect, give her, the credit that she deserves for the work that she does, and just getting her recognized in front of the engineering team. So I try to bring her to like all my engineering meetings and things like that, and just get her more exposure so they know who she is, so they respect her. Yeah, so get a hype man.
Okay.
I would say in addition to that, one of the most important things that I've learned over the many years is the same way that UX designers empathize and cater to our end users, we also need to empathize and cater to our stakeholders and the decision makers and find out what is important to them. And that is how you cater your evangelization of UX to them and wrapping it in a package that is most important to them. If all they think is you make things pretty, then you need to understand what exactly is your goal with this project and what can I do to help that. And be able to, if it's ROI, if it's quantity over quality, like just get it out there, make it work later, or as long as it works and make it pretty later, it's going back to rework, the idea of rework. Are you really saving anything if you're gonna have to rework it later because you're doing a lot of guesswork up front? So that's what's coming back to, what is it that your decision makers are wanting? What is their goal, and empathizing with them as well, not just your end user.
Okay, thanks, ladies. I think some of you have discovered within the app on the phone that you can submit questions. And so I want to be able to allow people to do that. So for the introverts who are afraid of public speaking, please feel free to submit questions on the phone. You can also upvote a question that you like. If there's something that you see up there that, in the app that doesn't address your concerns, feel free to submit. And then for you extroverts, feel free to raise your hand if you want to ask a question, because if there's topics or things that we haven't touched upon, we want you to be able to get the best out of this, this fireside chat. So I'm going to start with this first question for our lovely panelist here. How do you determine whether you want a focus on user experience or user interface? Which is a better fit for me? And then before actually we start that, for those who may not know, what is the difference between user experience and user interface? So I guess I'll go ahead and start. I'll just answer what's the difference, right? So the difference for UX, as we call user experience, is that you really focus more on the wayfinding, the usability, the functionality of a feature, and then user interface is the look and feel of a product, maybe the branding, and depending on an organization, if it's a smaller, maybe like a startup, that may be one in the same role. So if you Google UX, UI, sometimes you may see that there's a lot of overlap in terms of definition. That's because there is really no true black and white definition of it out there in the world, because it is a relatively new industry, right? So some companies specialize, like here at Pros, we do segregate the two disciplines, but in other places you are one and the same, especially at a startup. Okay, so I guess I will start with Jane. Jane, how would you basically decide what's a better fit for you?
So at my company, the way our team was set up before, for a product, we had a UX designer and a UI designer. Not to say that these two roles is completely separate. As a UI designer, your focus is on the visual, but you're also thinking about micro interactions. And there's a lot of collaboration between the UX designer and the UI designer, but you do still need to have that background. So as a UX designer, I need to have that visual eye for when I'm designing. And as a UI designer, they need to be thinking about user experience as well. So we're bouncing back and forth between the two. So I feel like which way you go into is whether you're interested in research strategy or you're interested in visual design. But like Kieu mentioned, it's actually sometimes a mix. You might have to do both. In some organizations, though, if you're lucky enough to be a specialist, then UX is more the structure, the wireframes, getting all of that experience nailed down. And then the UI is more of the visual design, the micro interaction, the collaboration that you actually have to have with the developers, because you're the next, they're the next person that's picking up your work. So the sign off, getting the work to be pixel perfect once it's produced, you have to have those skills as well.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead down the line here and select another one. All right, so I think we touched upon this one real quick. What is the best way for someone who's non-technical to get into UX? And I think we talked a little bit about that already. So, I'm just going to real quick, like I said, create a case study. Do some research out there on how to, tell that story in a portfolio, and that's really the best way for you to start breaking in if you are a non-designer. Really just think about, like, how do I improve the functionality in my portfolio through the story? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to, let's see. Here's another one. Oops. How many more minutes do we have, guys? 5 more minutes for questions. All right. So why did that not show up? Let me see. Here we go. Oh, I guess. All right. So I have no computer and software background. Will you please recommend any courses or boot camp where I can launch my career. Does anyone have a quick answer for that? We also have a resource slide at the end of this that we can share with you for some suggestions. And actually at the end of this conference, we have all of your emails. We'll be sending you some resources as well. So if neither of you or any of you have experience with that, I can go ahead and answer, or we can skip.
I mean, I have a really old school like resource. I don't know if you guys know Whitney Hess, but when I was learning about user experience design, she had a set of articles that I thought was really awesome. It was called "So You Want to Be a User Experience Designer," and that has a bunch of resources that I definitely went through. It was a lot of self-study. I didn't do any like general assembly type thing. It was a lot more self-study and learning through experience. And one other thing that I think is really key that you touched upon is storytelling, right? You don't need to know any computer science. You don't need to have like any of that technical background. But if you can tell stories, then you're going to be able to capture an audience, and that's an important part of your portfolio.
Definitely.
If I would, I have one non-conventional suggestion for you as well. Outside of literature and formal courses and whatnot, what you can do is, one, examine why you want to get into UX in the first place. What is drawing your attention there? What passion are you bringing? Because passion plays a lot into it. If you really care about the end user, then it can kind of take you there. So one challenge I would give you is think about the application that you have used before that was the worst possible user experience you've ever encountered. And how would you have improved that design? Like, how would you have improved that experience as their targeted user? And kind of challenge yourself in those ways and really think more critically and analytically that way.
Awesome. Okay, so we only have a few more minutes. So I just want to answer two more questions, and then we'll show the resource slide. I'm seeing a lot of you upvoting these questions now. So I'll go ahead and just read them out loud. So what are the top 5 tips for collecting business metrics? Where did it go? Yes, so what are the top 5 tips for collecting business metrics as a team? I guess, to earn value for mindful design. So essentially, how do you evangelize? What metrics are you going to use to, bring to the organization and prove your point, right?
I would say have a baseline that you're measuring against. So as a team at my company, we have a baseline that we're measuring, the pain point that the user is going through, whether it's maybe struggle scores using some of our data analytics to see that they're actually going through too many clicks and then they drop off. They don't actually complete their task. That's one KPI you can measure because that means money. If they don't get their task completed, that product isn't working. Other KPIs would be actually doing interview with your users, understanding what their needs are, and then influencing how that would actually retain them as a business or lose them as a business. So just some of the baseline you can set, and then measuring again once the product is released is a great way to prove to business your product is actually working.
All right, awesome. All right, so I'm gonna do one more. And then of course, we will be here at the end of the talk. So if you didn't get your question answered, you can come up and speak to us after. All right, so let me see here. Let's see what you all upvoted. Okay. I had some good ones up here, but they keep jumping. This is the first time I've used this app, guys, sorry. So, all right, this one is a really good one. And I think this is all kind of relates back to imposter syndrome, and especially if you do not have a background in UX or computers. All right, how do I make myself stand out from the people with the UX degrees or the HCI degrees or the comp sci degrees? So anyone want to take that? If not,
One, I think something to keep in mind is you won't find many people coming into a job interview saying, I have a degree in user experience. They will all have some kind of background that might have some similarity to it or completely out of a ballpark. I work with a UX designer who came from marine biology and another UX designer who came from music theory. And they are fantastic at what they do. And the way you make yourself stand out is drawing into your background, and finding some semblance into user experience. And the example I gave for me as a writer is my skill set in audience analysis and being able to cater my content in a digestible format to the end user. And when you are selling yourself and your background and how it would translate well into user experience, that to me is already critical thinking. It's because the whole thing about user experience is problem solving and solving that and understanding your user and making their lives easier. And that's the most important thing, is being able to draw your strongest skill sets and translating that into how you can accomplish the problem solving and critical thinking skills that it requires.
Yeah, so just to close it off, sorry, I know, Jane, you were going to comment. Okay.
I rambled, I'm sorry.
All right, well, if it's quick, you can respond. Otherwise, I'm just going to...
Very quick.
Okay, awesome.
Soft skills. I know that people won't tell you about this in their requirements when they're hiring, but companies are looking for people who are self-starters and collaborators. So if you can demonstrate that you can work with a team, or if that you have softer skills like starting organizations, be able to start projects, show those initiatives, that's a bonus that will help you stand out with people who has the same skill set that you have.
Okay, so I just got the signal that we can go a little bit further in terms of time. So I'll go ahead and just maybe one more question. Do we have time for one more question? All right, so real quick, I just want to touch on what these ladies are saying in regards to, what was the question again? Sorry. How to make yourself stand out? Okay, so I hear this all the time. I have interviewed lots of people. I have gone on lots of interviews, with big companies, small companies. I work very closely with the hiring managers here. What I always hear over and over again, regardless of your background, whether you're technical or artistic, is that, and to make yourself stand out, and this is actually, it sounds really simple, but you'll be amazed at how much people actually don't realize this, is the way you storytell, how you solve the problem with design. Basically, what was your design solution and how do you articulate that to really show a very thorough and thoughtful thought process. And the reason why it sounds really simple, but is actually does make you stand out, is that you'll be surprised. A lot of people do not have very good social skills, especially during interviewing. I can tell you that because from experience, we've interviewed many people, and it's no brainer, but definitely just practice how you would tell that story in a very articulate, I wouldn't say tacit, that's not a very succinct way. So it's really just about storytelling, honestly. Storytelling, and then obviously if you want to impress people with your visual design skills, then storytelling with visual design. But at the end of the day, they want to know, how did you come to this conclusion? What research did you do to come to this conclusion? And they just want to know it's not something pretty, and that there's a reason and a logic behind some of these. All right, so do we have time for one more or no? Yes, one more. Okay, cool. This one I feel like you can Google, but a lot of people upvoted it, so I'm going to go ahead and broadcast it, and we can do some real talk here. What is the career path and pay progression for a UX UI professional? And I think that maybe it's kind of, pay is a little touchy, but it's important to me. I got to pay bills. You all got to pay bills, so I want this to be addressed. Okay. So, all right. So, what is the career path? I can talk about that a little bit. So, interning definitely is where you break into the career if you're not already in it. I would definitely. This is a little bit off topic, but starting at a small company, even if it's not sexy like Google or whatever. Why? Because you will learn everything real fast. You're going to wear all hats, and you are going to be a generalist, but you get an idea of what it's like to be a researcher, a UI designer, a UX designer. But if you go to a big company, you're going to face a lot of bureaucracy, and they're going to put you in a silo. So, I mean, we do that there, but that's different because we're specializing. You know, at pros, it's different. It's a different thing. But at maybe another company, you know, you're relegated, so you're not really going to learn, right? So if you want to learn everything and you're just starting off, that's the best way. So anyway, interning is basically where you start off. Then you are, you know, junior designer, senior designer. Then you go to lead, and then maybe director or manager. And the pay, I don't know if we want to speak to the pay. It's better than being an architect. Yes. For sure, because
It's better than being a scientist.
yeah. Okay.
I can
All right, cool.
speak a little bit to that too.
All right.
One thing that was kind of interesting to me when I broke out of, I was at Newstar, another company for 5 years, and I decided it was time to either, you know, stick around for forever or take a chance on myself and jump to a new career elsewhere. And when I took that jump, I got a 40% increase in pay. So always believe in yourself
Okay,
and
yes.
take chances.
Awesome. So, sorry for cutting you off. Again, this is some resources for anyone that's kind of trying to break in. I just want to touch a little bit on that, and then we're going to get to the fun part where you can win prizes. All right? That's what everybody's really waiting for. I know, because you're tired, it's the end of the day. You want that iPad. I got it. All right. So we talked a little bit about just kind of how do you break into this. So I'm just going to stand up because I need to read the list here. Really just finding a mentor, putting yourself out there. I think we didn't get to this question, but one of the things we talked last night is just, if you were to do this all over again, and you didn't have guidance, like what would you have changed? And a lot of, you know, basically unanimously everybody said, find a mentor, because they really help you kind of get your footing. So in any case, finding a mentor, and how do you do that? You can go to meetups, local meetups. I have some lists here, and you can network. So some local meetups, and I'm plugging Jane and her organization here, is Hexagon. It's a women-focused user experience, I guess, organization founded in California, Silicon Valley, but now it's in Houston. We have HUXPA, Houston UX Professional Association, and then, you know, Brandon over there. He's one of the C-suite people, so if you want to learn more about HUXPA, please visit HUXPA. And this is, you know, you may know about these resources, but you may not, so that's why we're telling them here. Okay, HFES, Human Factors Ergonomics Society. And then, okay, cool. Anyway, we will send this out at the end, and that's it. So thank you, ladies, so much for giving some advice. Thanks, everyone, for sticking around.